Welcome to my breakdown of episode 2 of season 3 of The White Lotus. Special Treatments is the title of this episode, and it perfectly describes how many of these characters are treated. Now, it took them almost dying to switch up, but we saw Rick being kind to Chelsea. We also saw Mook showing concern for my guy Gaitok. But you know who isn't getting the special treatment that they've probably been used to? Well, that's Timothy, who finds out that the storm he's been trying to avoid is heading towards him and his family, and it looks like they're not going to be getting their happy ending. There is a lot to go over in today's breakdown, so without further ado, let's discuss this episode. Spoilers ahead. We open this episode with a perspective from what feels like someone watching from the water from a distance away from the White Lotus. It almost felt like someone was swimming or thinking what happens to Timothy in this episode. Maybe you would say it feels like someone was drowning and watching from afar. As we continue from the previous night of the last episode. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't ever recall an episode picking up from a previous scene into the next episode, but here we are as we see the conversation between Kate and Jacqueline. Last week we talked about the friend group being here to catch up with one another, and in this opening scene, we get a more of an understanding of how often they've kept up with each other over the years. Now, Jacqueline mentions how much better it is for them to be together versus over the phone, and Kate says that they really only see each other twice a year for dinners, but it's only between them two. As Jacqueline reveals, it has been over 4 years since she's seen Lori. As both seem to agree that Lori looks great, and they talk about her great energy and how much of a hard charger she is, and just overall a great person and a friend. Now, in this moment, we do get confirmation about the relationship status between Lori and her ex-husband, as they have gotten a divorce, and according to these two, it was pretty nasty. Now, we find out that Lori actually pays palimony to her ex, and they mention how he's been taking advantage of her financially over the years. Now, here is where the gossip comes in, because Kate talks about Lori's daughter Ellie and how she's taking her parents' situation hard, and Kate insinuates that it's the reason why she's been kicked out of 2 schools, to Jacqueline's surprise. Now, to me, this kind of insinuates that Kate's probably more involved in Lori's life more than Jacqueline has been over the years. Now, Kate goes on to describe Ellie as a hitter and a bruiser, and she even throws furniture. Now, Kate seems to have a dislike for the East Coast or the idea of living in a big city in general, because she shares her opinions on parents raising their kids in New York, and that adding to one of the reasons of Ellie's behavior. Now, Kate really seems to have an image of Lori, as she goes on to say that she's always been defined by her work, and that's good for her, and this leads to Jacqueline bringing up a time where Lori talked about getting this big promotion that never seemed to happen, and that they basically say that she peaked at the firm that she works in. Now, remember 2 seconds ago, they were both talking about Lori's great energy, she looks good, everything's going good with her, she's great, but now the real truth about how they feel, or at least Kate feels, who says to Jacqueline,
"No wonder she looks defeated. I thought you said she looked great." Wow.
It's so funny that Jacqueline even said, "I thought you said that she was all good 2 seconds ago." It's crazy how they initially talk so nice about Lori as if someone else was in the room and asked them about her, and they did the fake pleasantries, but once that person left, they really showed how they felt. Now, Kate double downs and says that Lori looks tired, and Jacqueline agrees, and she throws in her 2 cents and blames it on the drinking, especially after she drunk a whole bottle that same night. Now, I would be lying if I didn't admit that when Lori banged on that glass, that damn near had me jump out of my seat, and I nearly made a sound myself. Now, Lori briefly joins them, and yes, it seems like the drinking of the bottle has affected Lori, because she clearly is drunk as she comes down to get her charger. Now, Jacqueline tells her that they were just talking about her and how great she looked, and Kate and her talk about how they're going to have to fight over her for the week because they're just so excited to be together. Now, taking a look at this scene, look, it's not the most terrible thing that happened, because I think we've all been in this moment. Whether it's a family member or a friend or your partner in life, we've all been Kate and Jacqueline speaking about a person that we care about, but that doesn't protect them from this kind of behavior where we share their flaws or gossip about whatever situations, good or bad, that they find themselves in. But my biggest takeaway from this scene is that it's possible that Kate and Jacqueline may be closer as friends than either one of them are to Lori, especially after mention that they see each other for dinner at least twice a year, and Jacqueline hasn't even seen Lori for almost 4 years. Which makes me wonder what exactly about Lori got her into this circle of friends. Could it be that Lori's always been like the additional tag along for them, or someone they bring along to maybe look at and see as a kind gesture to someone around that's less than? Now, I'm sure Lori offers more to them than that, but again, it just feels like she's the outsider of the group so far. I also want to point out the possibility of Lori's drinking being an issue at some point this season, but also mentioning how they thought a monkey banged on the glass, and see this shot of the statue of the monkey here where there's some interesting dramatic music playing in the background. Now, as we'll talk about in this breakdown, there were a lot of monkeys in this episode that were looking from afar, and we'll talk about what I think that means, but I want to call back to remembering the very first shot of this season, which had a monkey in it. Now, putting an emphasis on the word shot, I wouldn't put it past Mr. Mike White, who we know is the creative behind this show. I wouldn't put it past him if he has monkeys maybe being responsible for the shooting that we heard in episode 1 opening scene. I just have a feeling that monkeys will play a very big role in this season. Now we cut to the next morning where we see these beautiful shots into our characters waking up. From seeing Piper doing her morning yoga into a picture of Saxon's ass and Locke waking up looking directly at it, into seeing our other couples waking up, including this shot of Rick trying to move Chelsea's arm off his chest, but she refuses to move. Now we'll be discussing it in today's breakdown, but he just seems so unhappy with her in this relationship, but things will change by the end of this episode. Now we see our staff arriving to work as Gaitok and Mook say their hellos, and she thanks him for fixing her bike. Now Gaitok invites her to lunch later and wants to tell her something that he wants to share with her. Now I just have to say, I never heard or known who Lisa, who plays Mook, was prior to the show, but man do I know now, because my comments here seem to be very excited to see her, but also the internet in general seems to be very excited and shares that same sentiment. Now, with this being her first acting gig, whether it's episode 1 or what she does in this episode, she's been pretty impressive so far, and I'm really excited to see what she does this season, and I'm going to have to check out her music someday. Now, at breakfast, we check in with the Ratliff family. Now, Timothy mentions how he didn't sleep well last night, and Victoria says that he should have taken her lorazepam. Now, this drug is said to help those who suffer from insomnia, but also, if you Google it, the thing that caught my attention was it saying the following. Now, the drug is said to cause paranoia or suicidal thoughts and impaired memory and judgment and coordination. Now, here's a key part here. Combining other substances, particularly alcohol, can slow breathing and possibly lead to death. So my question is, will someone in this family take this drug other than Victoria without knowing its side effects, and could it cause this season's big death? Also, I won't dismiss Victoria herself mentioning that it helped her sleep like a corpse, maybe insinuating that it could be her that died at some point in this season. Now, Timothy mentions that he's not a fan of taking any drugs, as Saxon, being the kiss-up that he is, agrees that he doesn't use them either, but Piper calls him out for taking Adderall all the damn time. Now, Piper mentioned how she wasn't the one who chose to stay at the White Lotus and how she feels about its guests.
It's like a Disneyland for rich bohemians from Malibu in their Lululemon yoga pants.
Now, just as she says that, in comes Kate in her yoga pants, which I'm assuming are Lululemon. She comes up to the table because she recognized Victoria. They attended a baby shower together for a mutual friend in Austin, and while Kate remembered her name and everything, we see Victoria had no memory of them spending time together over a weekend. I guess we can thank the drug for that memory loss. But there may be more to Victoria's reaction than the effects of the drug, because Kate introduces her to her friends and she says that she'll make sure to tell their mutual friend that she said hello, but Victoria seemed very unbothered by everything going on and made it very awkward. Now, Kate returns to her friends, and I got a kick out of their reaction to Victoria's response, and Jacqueline says that Victoria seems to be a little crazy. But I also really appreciate that Lachlan acknowledged the awkwardness, but also his mother's standoffish and kind of rude attitude towards Kate. Now, Victoria claims that it was over 10 years ago and plays off the interaction to just not knowing each other. I wonder if there's a possible beef there. Did something bad happen over the weekend between the two characters? Either way, I really hope that we get to see more interactions between these two, because that was pretty damn funny. Now, Saxon tells his mother who Jacqueline is, and she says that,
Oh,
She's famous.
should I be impressed? Actresses are all basically prostitutes.
and we see everyone in the family gets a kick out of that joke, except for Piper, again showing that she may not share similar feelings that the rest of her family does. Now, Mook checks in with Rick and Chelsea to confirm their morning plans, some in which Rick didn't sign up for, but Chelsea did, which is him to attend a stress management session. Now Rick gets even more unwanted news without his permission as Chelsea tells him about the dinner they're attending with Chloe and Greg. Again, we see Rick noticing the owner, and I'll be sharing my very, and I mean very interesting theories about his interest in her a little bit later. Now back with the friends, we see Valentine checks in with them on their morning plans, and Kate and Jacqueline thinks that this is the perfect opportunity to Lori to take a chance with hooking up with him, and based on her pulling her shades down, it definitely seems like something that might happen at some point this season. Now checking in with Belinda and Punchai as they begin their lessons of showing their signature treatments. Now I might be wrong, and I'm going to put a spoiler warning up there now for those that maybe didn't see the most recent trailer of the show, so again I'm warning you all for a possible spoiler. But based on the trailer at the end of last week's episode showing the weeks ahead, as you all can see on the screen now, it seems like Belinda and Punchai are sharing some moments here, and it appears that they might hook up and develop a romantic relationship at some point, and this episode definitely seems to show Belinda's romantic interest in him. Now here we get another reference to Victoria and her taking drugs. Now we don't hear the name of this drug. I don't know if it's the same drug that was mentioned earlier at the breakfast table, but she says she's taking this drug now during her massage because it makes her feel more comfortable and more relaxed. Again, it definitely seems like drugs that she takes or someone else takes seems to be setting up something for later. Now we head over to CM Piper, who's yet again doing yoga. She officially encounters one of those LBHs that Chloe told Chelsea about, as he just can't seem to stop looking at her and makes it very obvious and very uncomfortable for her. Meanwhile, we see Lachlan in a sensory deprivation tank, and we also see Sexton being a certified weirdo as he gets an erection during his massage. Now, during all this, we check in with Timothy, who calls his office, and they still haven't heard from Kenneth. As Timothy learns that the situation back home is getting out of hand because now the Washington Post is involved. Now here we get the title of the episode being shown as the characters experience the pleasures of the world's best treatments. From seeing Lori with Valentine, where there's some flirting going on, as you'll notice the lingering hand he puts on her shoulder, and he's giving her numbers that he says are of numbers of a woman half her age, which we find out is a common pickup line that he uses pretty frequently. We also see Belinda and Punchai to Chelsea, and here we have Tim, who isn't quite enjoying his current situation. Now we see him on a treadmill, increasingly going faster, which to me could symbolize him running from this oncoming storm headed his way from back home with his Kenneth case. Again, we see this shot of a monkey who's always watching from afar and could be a representation of us as the audience watching these characters. Now here we see Rick with Amrita, who we last saw in the flashback shootout with Zion. Now Rick opens up a bit and shares his current high stress levels, and the question comes up about a time when he can remember being stress-free and maybe when he was a younger age, as he responds by sharing his mom OD'd when he was 10 and that his father was murdered before he was even born.
I never had an identity. I don't need to detach. I'm already nothing. If nobody puts gas in the tank is empty. That's not an illusion. The car won't start. Nothing comes from nothing, right?
A very dark and pessimistic viewpoint about himself, which just makes him again the most mysterious character so far in the early parts of this story. Is what he said about his mother and his father true? And if so, does that explain why he is the way he is? Now he mentions that he's a weed smoker and he's looking for a connect, and putting our drug conversation from earlier into the equation, could this need of drugs lead him to one of the members of the Ratliff family? Now this is an interesting scene with these characters, Piper, Sexton, and their mom, as she's ordering food. We see Sexton in the background making a bunch of noise as he says that he was disappointed by the massage he got because it didn't end in a happy ending.
Aren't they all supposed to be a little special?
Definitely an inappropriate moment by him, and not only him saying that, but also remembering that he did get an erection when he was getting a massage. Now, it was interesting going back to Victoria's comments earlier about actresses being prostitutes, because in many places, offering happy endings is illegal and considered a form of prostitution. Now, in comes Timothy storming in. He's pissed by the time difference, and we get one of the funniest line deliveries by Victoria so far.
He works so hard. He needs to calm his ass down.
Now it's time for Belinda to share her talents with her massage treatments, as she's impressed by Punchi's and another funny moment here.
Or on my stomach.
On my stomach. No, my stomach. Your stomach.
Yeah, we know where her mind's at, and again sets up the possible romantic tension between these two characters. Now let's talk about the lunchtime with Mook and my guy Gaitok. Now, Gaitok seems like a good catch for anyone, man. Like, so far, he seems very kind and respectful, and he even knows how to cook, which to everyone out there, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for your partner to know how to cook? Comment below. Now, he gets into the thing that he wants to share with her, and it's that he likes her, which is something that I mentioned back in episode 1 because it was pretty damn obvious. Now, Mook initially laughs it off, but let my guy explain his feelings. He mentions how their families already know each other, her brother's a fan of him, they work together, they come from the same neck of the woods, and he compliments her intelligence. I mean, my guy is saying all the right things. Look at the honesty too. He says that he might not be as smart as her, but at least he's a handy guy. Now, Mook brings up the point that they've never been on a date before and kind of insinuates that she doesn't really look at him that way and she doesn't want him to make it weird. I feel bad for my guy because I think we've all either have been in a situation or at least know someone that's been through this exact same thing where you've known someone for so long that they're basically family and that other person sees you as just that, like a brother or a sister, but you feel differently about them. So it's going to be interesting to see if Mook changes her mind at some point, especially after what happens to him later in this episode, or if this now being out there that he likes her will change the dynamic moving forward. Now, Rick and Chelsea talk about his session with the wise Indian woman, as he puts it, and how he won't be returning. Now, yes, has Chelsea been a bit forceful by trying to bring back his joy, and I'm starting to think that he never had joy to begin with, but calling her an idiot was just extremely rude to me, and again, just makes me wonder what she sees in him. But in comes Chloe, who's looking great, by the way, as Chelsea and her are going to be hanging out for the rest of the day, leaving grumpy grandpa to take a much-needed nap. Am I being too harsh on Mr. Rick? Like, if the story is true that he lost his father before he was born and lost his mom when he was 10, as he described earlier in the episode, and look, not making excuses for his a-holery attitude, but it could explain his actions, but also it could explain his lack of affection and love towards Chelsea. Okay, I might have been wrong about the 2 versus 1 idea between Kate and Jacqueline, with Lori being the odd one out, because this scene may have said otherwise. Now, the conversation about their sessions with Valentine comes up, and Lori realizes that all the compliments he said to her was what he said to Jacqueline, but the conversation switches to their appearances and body fat, and Jacqueline being shocked that her and Lori share a similar fat percentage. Then Jacqueline continues this almost body shaming innuendos when saying that Kate's body readings were average because the fatty foods in Austin, instead of saying the opposite thing. Then she brags about her husband of 1 year, whom body is crazy and catches so much attention from others, and how addicted they are to one another. This might be the first time Kate's been perturbed by Jacqueline, and I can see how compliments about her weight and her looks being mentioned a few times so far being a talking point between Lori and Kate, and again, starting up this tension between them. All we need now is Jacqueline and Lori to find something to bond over about Kate, and things were really good going. Now, speaking of rude, we see Chloe and Chelsea discuss their boyfriend's attitude towards them, as Greg's way of apologizing is giving away Tanya's money for Chloe to spend. By the way, Chloe and Greg, was she the one that he was on the phone with at the end of season 2, episode 2? Go back and watch that scene, but basically it was him on the phone saying that Tanya was clueless, and he said that he loved whoever was on the other line and that he would be home soon. So was Chloe in on the scheme, or is she his next target? Now, as the afternoon winds down, we get into a scene between Piper and Lachlan. Now, he mentions that he tried praying in the tank, and Piper takes a lot of interest in him talking about this subject matter. He says that it felt like he was talking to himself and didn't feel any higher power present, but Piper explains how she feels when she does her praying.
I do.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Don't you feel like that could just be like wishful thinking, like you want to feel something so you...
It's real.
She shut that down very quickly, but it does beg the question on her beliefs and how there are people in the world that want something so badly to believe in that they force themselves to thinking that they have some connection to some higher power. Locke takes this silence between them as an opportunity to bring up what him and Saxon talked about the other night about her not having sex. Now, he goes over the conversation with her, and she digs for more answers about the conversation, and Locke replies by saying that it was said as a compliment, but Piper takes it as for the weird remark that it was, and to make matters worse, Lachlan proceeds to ask if she's actually had sex, which causes Piper to leave this whole conversation. Now, we discussed this last week, and I saw in the comments that some of you all interpreted their night dynamic differently than I did, of how I felt like it was like a very weird relationship between the three. And some of you all felt that Lachlan and her were victims of their older brother. Now, I'm not saying that anyone was right or wrong at this point in the story between the relationships, but after this scene, let me know if you feel like it was a change in your viewpoint on how Lachlan is questioning his sister's sexual experiences. By the way, comment below. I guess it depends on the situation and the relationship, but is it weird for siblings to discuss sex with each other, especially when it's the opposite sex? Now, yet again, we have a monkey, and it feels more like it's supposed to represent us from going from one character to the next character, and they're always present as we cut to seeing Chelsea and Chloe shopping. Now, during this, we see Gaitok getting invited to a fight of a friend of Valentine who's going to be involved in the fight. Now, unfortunately, this conversation distracted my guy Gaitok from his job as a truck drives by and the people inside rush through the gates and ended up robbing the store that Chelsea and Chloe were in. Now, they take some jewelry, and as they get back to the gate, the one with the gun gets into a scuffle with Gaitok and pistol whips him, and they get away. So let's take this from the top. Was Valentine a part of this robbery? He just so happens to be leaving and talking to Gaitok, which led to the gate being open and Gaitok not taking a chance to speak to them. Now, as far as the robbery goes and the person involved, their face was covered with a mask and they had glasses on, so it was hard to make them out. But you also notice that they made sure to not speak so loudly. Obviously, they don't want to attract any attention towards them, but it almost felt like there was a moment between the person and Chelsea, almost like they didn't want her to recognize their voice, which makes me believe, was it possible that that was Rick or maybe someone we met so far in the show? Now, lastly, during that scuffle, there was another man in the car and we get a brief shot of them from behind. So going back to Valentine, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a connection between him and the robbers, and I wouldn't be surprised if when we see Gaitok go to the fight that maybe the fighter is the one that was involved in the robbery, or at the very least, I bet Gaitok sees one of them at the fight and it'll be revealed that one of them were actually involved. Either way, I doubt this is the last time that we've seen of these criminals and having some consequences moving forward. Now, I want to think that the behavior and the sense of urgency to speak to the owner and casing out the husband is all a red herring for Rick, but look at his face in this scene. Is this a face of a person that's genuinely concerned for his girlfriend who just experienced a robbery and had a gun pointed at her face? Or is this the look in the face of a man who just committed that crime and does indeed have nefarious plans ahead? Now on to the back half of this episode as we lead into the night scenes. Now Mook shows her worriedness towards Tak as she checks in on him, and he's feeling a lot better after she rubs his arm and gives him this look here, and especially after she calls him brave. My guy might have to call those robbers back if this is the kind of attention he's going to get from her. But in all seriousness, I do think we can expect Gaitok to take things more seriously, and not saying that he didn't before. I bet that he's going to probably beef up the security to assure that this doesn't happen again, especially if it concerns the safety of Mook. Now at dinner, Chloe makes a joke about missing out on the action as Chelsea and Rick's room is now comp for the situation. Now not only did we see the kindness from Rick earlier in the scene, but he continues to show this kindness to her and thanks her for doing a good job of getting their room comped, and he also calls her babe. It looks like all it took for him to be nice to her was to have a gun pointed in her face as Chelsea encourages Rick to interact with Greg. Now we see him listening to Chelsea, and he makes some small talk with Greg as he asks him about his occupation, in which he tells him that he's retired. Now Rick follows that up and says, well, what did you do before that? And we see Greg tells him, well, he did a little bit of this and a little bit of that, leaving out the part of him scamming people. Now Rick asks Greg and Chloe how they met, and they say that they met through a match service in Dubai. Now, I'm really torn about whether she was a part of the tie-in situation because Chloe acted very sus when Rick asked where they met, and it seemed like they just had to make up a story on the fly. But then the other side of me thinks that maybe this is real, that she might be a hooker that Rick talks about later, because when Chloe and Greg were fighting about if she was French or Canadian, you know, that seemed like an actual fight. That seemed like there was like a fight with a new couple that really doesn't know each other. But again, the situation could be true, or the bickering over, again, where she's from might be all a part of their ruse. Now look, if Saxon couldn't be more of an asshole, we get this scene where the waitresses come to get the plates off the Ratliff's table, and Locke questions if the women were transgender, and Saxon makes a very off-colored joke about the trans community in Thailand.
Well, you know what they say. Having sex in Thailand is like eating a box of chocolates. You never know which one's gonna have nuts.
Of course, you all can do your own research, but Thailand is a very popular destination for the trans community, but like most places, still unfortunately experiences discrimination and have very limited rights. Now, as far as the story is concerned, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up seeing Sexton, who just seems to be extremely horny at this point. He might end up having sex with a transgender and is very aware of that, but even bringing it to Lachlan, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Lachlan having some type of interaction with the trans, and I feel like we're going to see him exploring his sexuality and seeing what his sexual preferences are. From here, we see Piper is just tired of her brother's actions and alludes to the conversation she had with her younger brother earlier, but we see the parents step in and try to calm down their, back and forth bickering as Victoria gives them a bit of advice that to me speaks to their privileges of coming from money. Now, during all this, we see Tim finally gets information he's been waiting all day for. Now, this is a big moment here because we see Belinda notices Greg across the way, and this to me sets up a plot that I think we've all been waiting for, and that is Greg getting what he deserves for what he did to Tanya. Now, here we get maybe one of my favorite moments of the episode. It's definitely a moment that stuck in my head as we see Shatala performing an absolute banger of a song. I do want to point out Rick, who again is just staring at the owner, Shatala, and it hit me in this moment, and I'm going to share a pretty wild theory with you all. Stick with me. Now, we know that Shatala used to be famous back in the day as a singer and an actress. What if Rick somehow got a hold of her older movies and he would watch them as a kid, and it was his way of bonding with her as kind of like a mother figure, because we know he didn't have one after the age of 10. And I think he's here to thank her for all the good memories, or as it appears in the trailer of last week, he wants to do a project with her.
I am in the entertainment business, working on a project in Bangkok. I know you used to be an actress.
I was.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna do something fucking stupid.
As he listens in to her telling her friends that she's leaving to go to Bangkok tomorrow because of her husband's recent stroke. Now, as we come to it in this episode, we see Timothy finally speaking to Kenneth.
What exactly do they know?
They have everything, Tim.
Man, the FBI is now involved and they know everything, and Tim's worst nightmare comes true as he is wrapped into this money laundering bribery situation. Now, Timothy says he only made $10 million from this scheme and threatens to kill Kenny, who says that he'll do him one better because he'll do it himself, as they hang up the phone, and wouldn't you know it, Gaitok just happens to have seen this whole conversation, and it's safe to assume that without context, he most likely is going to think that the conversation was about the robbery that happened earlier in the day, and now sees this guest in Timothy, or maybe the whole family, being involved. Again, I've lost count of how many monkeys showed up in this episode, but we have one here, and we also end where we began with our friend group. As Jacqueline heads to bed to read Shatala's book, you notice how Jacqueline looks at the front of the book and also the back of the book. The back of the book is young Shatala from her past, and the front of the book is her present. To me, this was symbolic to Jacqueline's mindset of her being a aging star. All the talk of her body fat being low and her young husband and all that is definitely opening the door to her character leading towards a character who's suffering from identity issues and having to live up to her younger self and chasing the past and not embracing herself now. Now, back in the living room with Lori and Kate, and like I said was going to happen, these two toxic bonding over Jacqueline. They talk about her competitiveness and also being a narcissist, as Kate brings up her vanity, and another hilarious line here by Kate describing Jacqueline's face.
Rear. Did she sandblast her face or something? It's very waxy.
They talk about her husband and them possibly not living in the same city, and Jacqueline being lonely and believes it's all a front. As they say, the bigger the front, the bigger the back, which I've never heard before, but I might actually have to pull that out one day. Now, Jacqueline overhears the whispering in the other room, and man, the tables have turned in 24 hours from Kate and Jacqueline gossiping over Lori, and now we have Lori and Kate gossiping over Jacqueline. As we end with Chelsea and Rick, who's cracked the case with Greg and Chloe calling her a hooker. And like I said earlier, he might be right, and it could play into my thoughts about her being involved with Tanya's death. Now, Rick tells her that he's going to Bangkok in the morning, as we know that he's going there for Shatala and her husband, but it hit me in this moment, yet again, a crazy theory, stick with me. What if Jim, her husband, had something to do with his father being murdered and he's seeking revenge? But look, talking about a difference of 24 hours, we see Rick and Chelsea sharing the most intimate moment yet between the two. As we end this episode with Timothy calling to obtain a lawyer for the shitstorm coming his way, or should I say tsunami coming, as he watches his family walk inside, and just so happens that Locke talking about a storm that came through and nobody listened to the warnings, a perfect illustration of what Timothy is going through in this exact moment. Now, last week in the comments, I saw that some people thought the premiere episode was a letdown. And look, to each their own. I personally really enjoyed it, but I think it's safe to say that this episode was pretty damn good. I really love the change in dynamics between seeing Lori and Kate bonding over calling out Jacqueline and continuing setting up somewhat fakeness towards each other. To me, the Rick and Chelsea stuff was my favorite from the narrative standpoint, and the mystery behind Rick and if he was maybe involved with the robbery and of course his interest in the owner. The Ratliff family continues to be a hot damn mess, but I am here for it. It's definitely cringy, but it also provides some of the most comedic moments of the episode. Staff stuff is getting really interesting with Belinda and Punchai, and of course we have Mook and my boy Gaitok. And I can't forget the little sneak peek into Belinda looking into getting revenge for Tanya into looking into Greg. I love how the title played into the story and seeing the literal special treatment shown by certain characters throughout the narrative. So there you have it. That's my breakdown of the second episode of season 3 of The White Lotus. Now, if you all are still here at this point in the video, shout out to you. You're the MVP. I really appreciate the support from watching last week's video and of course watching today's video. Do me a favor, put in the comments right now, hashtag a storm is coming. Now, my favorite part of watching this show is reading you all's comments, so please let me know your thoughts on this episode. Share your thoughts on the new dynamics between the friend group, Timothy's situation, will Mook give Gaitok a chance, and of course, who's the robbers and what's going on with Rick and Greg, and last but not least, after this episode, who do you think is going to end up dead? Now, if you all enjoyed this breakdown, please do me a favor, hit that like button. Let's try to get this to 1,500 likes. I would really appreciate the support, but also consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show like we do. And of course, if this is your first time here, I want to welcome you to the channel. Consider sticking around, checking out my White Lotus content. I'm covering Severance, I'm covering Invincible, and a ton of new movies. So consider sticking around and subscribing today. And also, if you all want to show even more support, consider joining the channel memberships, where I might have some exclusive content coming from the White Lotus coming pretty soon. Don't forget, you all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.